So if these new Nvidia rumors are true, the RTX 4080, if you happen to have one, or maybe we're considering buying one, may actually go through quite a price dip. What new GPU could do this specifically to the 4080? That's the one that I think is going to be most affected. I mean, listen, it hasn't really been all that popular since it came out. Nothing wrong with the GPU. 16 gigabytes of VRAM is adequate, even for 4K gaming in most cases. It's a pretty powerful GPU. Obviously, overshadowed by the more expensive RTX 4090, but the rumors, according to video cards, and I even wrote an article on Hot Hardware this morning reflecting on that news, the 4080 Ti, maybe 20 gigabytes of VRAM. How does that sound? That's pretty interesting. That would, of course, alleviate some of the complaints that Nvidia really rightfully has been getting for the type of VRAM and the amount. Memory bandwidth, for example, has been an issue on some of like the high-end GPUs. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. Remember the 4070 Ti? That was also supposed to be a 4080 until Nvidia changed the naming. So really interesting. 20 gigabytes of VRAM would make it competitive with AMD as well. Of course, AMD always tries to give out more VRAM on their higher end offerings, even if it isn't necessarily apples to apples, like a slower VRAM type. The number still really makes people, happy when they see it. You don't want to see 12 gigabytes of VRAM on an expensive 4080, for example, which is why it got relegated to the 4070 Ti, which is basically kind of borderline going into 2023. So 4080 Ti, is it something that would be interesting? Look at what potentially the price would be. Now, these are all just rumors. We don't know where it's going to end up. I think in a lot of cases, even Nvidia prices things like at the last minute according to what's going on in the market, but potentially $1199 would be the price of a 4080 Ti. Now, obviously, those amongst you will probably notice that's the same price that the 3080 Ti was, $1199. So that kind of brings us back a little bit to last generation where things were priced, maybe a little bit more fairly. That means the 4080 needs to get a price cut. Exactly how much, we don't really know. From talking to other gamers on my channel ever since the 4080 came out, it seems like maybe $999 is where people would consider the 4080 more, and I think that's probably correct. That has to be somewhere there or lower, because the 4080 has been on sale for as low as $1,030 or in the low thousands some of the time in some outlets, and even then people have been like, it's still a little bit too expensive. It should be $999 and less. So if Nvidia pushes it to $999, I mean, that's going to really push the competition against AMD. The 7900 XTX, while it does perform better than the 4080 in many cases, it doesn't always. When it comes to ray tracing, 4080 is still going to be ahead. When it comes to things like DLSS 3, it's way ahead than something like FSR 3, which was just recently announced in only 2 games. So Nvidia certainly has the brand name and sort of the clout to be able to still command, the market share compared to AMD. And then that means that the 7900 XTX likely will have to get even lower in price, which is not bad news. It's a very good GPU. And if that one goes down, everything else in the stack likewise will go down. It seems like AMD and Nvidia have been competing more in that mid-range, maybe the 7800 XT and the 4070. That's where a lot of these battles have been going on. But with a 4080 Ti, we could see finally some type of high-end battle that, even though it's still over $1,000, at least it's cheaper than the 4090, and it most likely won't perform all that much worse than a 4090. It's going to be somewhere in between a 4080 and 4090. Thankfully, this generation, there is that space for a GPU to slot right in there. I mean, you can thank the 4090 for being, in many cases, extremely powerful. Remember those early graphs of benchmarks? 4090 is all the way out here, and even the 4080 and all the other GPUs are way in the back. It almost looks like a next generation GPU, which it probably kind of is. So having another GPU that's cheaper and can slot in there, I think it could probably do pretty well. Remember, the 4090 sold extremely well. That's one of the GPUs that seem to have sold out this generation compared to everything else. So something that doesn't have too many big drawbacks, good VRAM, and even though 1199 is extremely expensive, don't get me wrong, we're talking about the super high end. It's something that's going to pull people away from perhaps AMD's high end, and with the 4090 could also be used for like machine learning and AI in smaller applications. So I think it certainly has a lot of potential to be a little bit disruptive in that sort of higher end space. So even if you're not in the market for a $1,200 GPU, that's going to be less and less people. The good news is it's going to push everything else down, including the 4080. If the 4080 gets down low, 4070 Ti is going to have to get down even lower, or else it's not going to make sense. You know, it probably has a cutoff point around the 4070. That's where that particular market is probably going to be more based on what the 7800 XT does. Remember, that GPU can perform as well, if not better, than a 4070 sometimes, but it's $100 cheaper at least. Then, of course, the LSS3, more efficient. All of those points go to the Nvidia side. And, of course, just a massive market share. If you show a group of people Nvidia and AMD GPUs, if things are kind of similar, most likely they'll go for Nvidia just because they're the biggest market player, maybe have more mature drivers. So it's not all just, I think, fanboys or bias. There is something to it with the type of features that those GPUs are bringing. That's just the reality. That's why AMD certainly has to really compete on pricing. And the bigger question is going to be, if a 4080 Ti comes out, does that mean that AMD slots in another really high-end GPU to compete with it? Or are they just happy to drop the price on the 7900 XTX to make that super competitive? I mean, if you're going to be, saving hundreds of dollars and buying an XTX, then it's going to be kind of a, difficult question if it's worth it to go to the 4080 Ti. That's going to be $1,200 probably at least. So that's going to be something interesting to see. That competition in the high end, which is good. We need more competition on every single level of the different GPUs. All right, guys, let me know what you think down below. Do you think a 4080 Ti could really be a game changer for, $1,000 and above? Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on my next video.